So here's your lesson on food chains and food webs. All right, let's get started. All right, so first of all, what's the point of a food chain or a food web? And you'll see right off the bat that we have three words in common with every one of these bullets: energy, energy, energy. So all organisms need to obtain energy to survive. We all need an energy source. Some of it get it from the sun if we are producers. Some of it are going to consume it, okay? And there's three classes of consumers that we're going to talk about in this presentation. So to show the movement of energy throughout the ecosystem, and some organisms make their own, others eat other things to obtain their energy. So it's all about that energy. All right. Okay, so who are the players in the game? Where does energy come from? All right, so you always need a primary source or a source of energy to come into any food chain or food web. And that primary energy source for this planet is our sun. If the sun goes out, then any food chain or any flow of energy doesn't have a source. So it all comes to an end. So our primary source of energy is the sun. That gets converted into a form of chemical energy by our producers. So any green plant that does photosynthesis, they have the ability to take that light energy from the sun and to make things like proteins and carbohydrates and sugars and fats out of it. They feed themselves because they have a special type of cell that has these things called chloroplasts in it, which make them green, and they make their own food. That's why they're called producers, because they produce their own food. Now, everything else on the planet has to eat their own food. They need to consume it. So everything else from there on are called consumers. And we'll go over all those consumer levels today, and what they eat determines what kind of consumer they are. But this is our primary source of energy. And because we absolutely need you to remember that the sun is the primary source of energy, draw a circle around the source of energy. So when we look at this environment here, we know that this is our primary source of energy. We have no crocodiles without any fish. We have no fish without any algae. We have no algae without the sun. We have no lions without the giraffes. We have no giraffes without the trees and the grass. And we have no trees and grass without the sun. So it all points back to the sun no matter what ecosystem that you live in. All right, so we'll start from the beginning. All right, so we're going to start with primary producer, or a fancy name for a producer is called an autotroph. Okay, if you just remember producer, that's fine. The reason why it's called autotroph is because auto means that you kind of make your own. Okay, you make your own energy. Like I said, that's called photosynthesis. Only green plants are capable of doing that. So these are the first things that capture the energy from the sun, all the plants. Then that energy flows because some of those green plants are eaten. And the things that eat green plants are called herbivores. And because this is the first level of consumers that eat those green plants, we call them primary consumers, or you can call them first level consumers. And a rabbit is a perfect example of this because all they eat are plants. Okay, grasshoppers, deer, anything that just eats plants are what we call an herbivore. So we've taken that energy from the sun and then we have put it into an organism. And these organisms are called herbivores, and they are first level consumers. Okay, let's go on. Now, sometimes those first level consumers, those herbivores, their energy gets transferred up the food chain. And this is where we're coming into our secondary consumers. Now, these can be smaller carnivores, or they can be what's called omnivores. That's coming up on the next slide. So the energy in the herbivores is transferred to the next level. These are what we call predators because they eat other organisms. They have to get their energy from something else, and that something else is another animal. So examples of these would be snakes, wolves, raccoons, fish that eat other fish. Well, that one was secondary. So now we're going to start getting into bigger secondary, or what we call tertiary. Some organisms can eat plants, or they like to eat animals as well. A bear is a perfect example of this. You are a perfect example of this. You are what's called an omnivore. So you can eat plants, or you can eat meat. You eat both. So your diet is very varied. Okay, that means you eat both. Crows are a good example of that. Raccoons are good examples of that. Skunks are great examples of that. Omnivores are diverse on what they eat. Then once we get more into the third level of our consumers, we start to deal with more of the really big predators. Their third level or tertiary level are our big carnivores. So carnivores are only meat eaters. And some good examples of carnivores would be wolves and hawks and polar bears and lions. Sometimes we call this quaternary levels if we go far enough in a food chain. Quaternary meaning a fourth level. Alligators, hawks, polar bears. All right. And then decomposers are a special type of consumer because they don't really like eat something. What they do is they absorb their energy. And some people get confused with decomposers because they remind them a lot like plants. I mean, look at this mushroom right here. It grows out of the ground, but it's not a plant because this mushroom does not make its own food. It doesn't do photosynthesis at all. It does not get its energy from the sun. Good way to remember that is mushrooms like to grow in the shade. They don't like places where there's a lot of sun. So mushrooms are actually absorbing nutrients or absorbing food from what's in the dirt, dead stuff. They're what's called decomposers. Other examples of decomposers are bacteria. So when you want to remember what decomposers are, the true decomposers, I want you to think of bacteria, and I also want you to think of mushrooms or fungus in general, okay? They're taking the dead stuff and what they're doing is they're recycling all of that energy that may come from a dead carnivore or a dead producer or a dead first or second level consumer. And when that energy gets absorbed, it goes back into the ground and then it's available again for another go around or another cycle. Decomposers are very important for any ecosystem because they recycle the nutrients. All right, so let's sum it all up here before we go too much further. All right, so we have our consumer levels and carnivores, omnivores, and they're all color coded. So you can pause this video and you can go ahead and organize it. So I'll do it right now. So I'm gonna take my green and that's gonna be the producer. So I know that that's all the green plants. I'm gonna put that there. All right, first level consumers. Okay, so these consumers are going to eat what's underneath them. So first level consumers are herbivores. All right, so herbivores are blue. So I'm going to take my blue and I'm going to put it right here. So those are my first level herbivores. All right, my next one is my second level consumers. All right, so second level consumers, they can be carnivores or they can be omnivores. Let's just say at this point, let's say that they are omnivores. So these are organisms that can eat plants or they can eat organisms. And then the last one here, we'll put a carnivore right here at a third level. Now, carnivores and omnivores, they can kind of go different places. So we can take the red and we can put it down here. We can even take a big omnivore, like a big grizzly bear, and we can put it there. So I don't want you to get tripped up with these. Just think omnivores and carnivores end up here. Just depends on how big they are. If I take a small omnivore, like a turtle, I would probably put it here. But if I took a big omnivore, like a grizzly bear, then I would put it here, okay? And then right here, these are going to be all of our consumer levels. So this food pyramid right here, this gives us 3 levels, but food chains can be many, many levels. They can get 5, 6, 7, 8 levels, okay? All right, let's get some more practice. So this is what we call a food chain. Food chains always start with a producer. And then the arrows represent how the energy is flowing. So in this case, we have corn that's eaten by a rat. So the energy from the corn goes into the rat, and then the energy from the rat goes into the owl. This one we have carrots, and that goes into the rabbit. Then the energy from the rabbit goes into the fox, and then the fox is eaten by the lion. Okay, so all the energy is flowing this way. So this one has 3 levels. This one has 4 levels, and this one actually has 5 levels, all the way up to the top of consumer. The big carnivore here is the eagle. The directions want you to circle the herbivores in green. Go ahead, circle the herbivores or primary consumers. Pause me and you guys can do it. I'll do it right now. So green, herbivores. Okay, that eats plants, that eats plants, and that eats plants. I know that because all I have to do is look and see where the energy came from. If I follow the arrow back and it's connected to a plant, I know It's an herbivore. All right, so this one wants us to do the carnivores or secondary consumers. So carnivores eat meat. So we got to figure out what organisms the arrow's tracing back to. That's another animal. All right, so we've got to do this one in red. This one eats meat because it's coming from the rat. That one eats meat. And we got to do this one too. There it's classified as a kind of a secondary consumer. And then our meat eaters here, like the frog eats a grasshopper. Some people don't classify insects as meat, but they are. It's an animal. So I can circle all these really and be accurate. So the snake eats the frog, the owl eats the snake. All of those are classified as secondary consumers. All right, now we're leading to something more complicated. So this is called a food web. All a food web is a whole bunch of food chains put together. Because if I go back a slide and I look at this, we'll take this example here. And we look at these food chains. Rats don't always eat corn, they eat lots of stuff, right? And owls don't only eat rats, they eat mice and shrews and birds and everything else. So a food chain only shows you one way that energy can flow. A food web is more realistic. So in this case, we have a tomato plant, and the tomato plant can get eaten by a goat, a rabbit, or a rat. So there's three organisms that it shows you where its energy is coming from a tomato plant. And then a rat, that energy from the rat can flow up to a wildcat, an owl, or a snake. So you follow the arrows up and it will always take you to a big level predator. And in this food web, it doesn't show it to you, but all of these levels, if they die and they end up in the ground, where is their energy going to get recycled? You should say decomposers. All right, so decomposers can take any one of these and recycle them, and an arrow can go to a decomposer. So this is what a food web is. All right, so let's play with this food web here. Now this one wants me to circle the producers in green. All right, so producers are green plants. So I'm gonna circle the producers in green. So let's see, producer here, and producer there. Don't circle fungus, right? It's not a producer, okay? It's a decomposer. All right, the next one, circle two herbivores in blue. All right, so herbivores eat plants. Okay, so I'm gonna follow a plant up. Okay, so deer is an herbivore, a rabbit is an herbivore, a grasshopper, and it looks like a squirrel is an herbivore. I know I only need to circle two, I got carried away. All right, now circle two large carnivores. So now I'm gonna look for organisms that are all the way up in the food chain, things where we don't see arrows flow out to any other organism. It kind of ends with them. All right, so this one needs to be in orange. All right, so orange, big ones. Okay, so I'm gonna circle a mountain lion. I skipped a step. Two small carnivores. Okay, so now small carnivores in orange. So here's a small carnivore. Look, it's the shrew. That's probably the smallest carnivore. They eat the grasshopper. I'll classify a snake, probably a little snake, because I know it's going to a hawk, so it can't be too big. Insect-eating bird, that's a small carnivore there too. Circle two large carnivores in red. So I'm gonna get after the large carnivores now. So here's my hawk, that's a large one. So is the mountain lion. They're kind of the king of their domain. And just so we have all the answers on one slide, I'm gonna go back and do my herbivores in blue. So here's an herbivore, herbivore. And my producers are in green. So green. And I wish I had a question on here that said, circle your decomposers in black. I got fungi, and if you read really carefully, we also have bacteria down there. So we have our decomposers there as well. All right, now we have to draw the arrows that show the flow of energy. Think of where energy comes from. It comes from the sun. And then the first thing that can grab that energy is a green plant. It's going to be a producer. So we got to start with a producer. Okay, so I'm going to take my green plant and I'm going to take it to a bird, because this bird eats the fruit off the plant, but the rabbit can also eat it. Remember, I'm going to draw my arrows the way the energy is going to flow. And then I know that a rabbit can get eaten by a snake. I know that a snake can get eaten by an eagle. But I know that rabbits can also get eaten by eagles. So the eagles is where a lot of arrows are going to flow. And depending on how hungry that eagle, I guess a bird could probably go to the eagle. Right there. All right, let's go to one that's a little bit more complicated. All right, so now we got to draw arrows to show the flow of energy through here. So remember, always start with green plants. So this is going to get a little cluttered here. All right, so here's some grass and here's some leaves. So I know this can go to a grasshopper, and I know grass can also go to a rabbit, and the leaf can get eaten by the grasshopper too, and the grass can go to the caterpillar, and the leaf can go to the caterpillar, and you're just going to keep flowing that energy, and you're probably going to have a lot of arrows on this food web. All right, there's your lesson on food chains and food webs.